We're going to talk about PCB track impedance and the impedance measurement feature of Mentor Graphics PADS Professional Layout software. In this example, I have a very small circuit board that's roughly 60 mils in thickness, very common for a circuit board. And I have two terminations, T1, one on the left, and T2, one on the right. I have a couple of reactive components, C1 and L1 on the left, L2 and C2 on the right, and a few traces connecting these components. Now, the very first thing we have to do when we want to measure track impedance in PADS Professional is we want to go up under Setup, under Layer Definition. In this particular case, we have a top layer that represents the layer that these traces are on, and then we have a bottom layer that's right beneath these traces. It's the next layer down. This is one very important fact, that we have to have the bottom layer set as the cam plane rather than no plane or split mixed in order to measure impedance. The other settings that are also critical to get a good result or correct result is under the thickness selection, under the electrical layers, and right here we have a count of 2 of 20. This is just a 2-layered board. The substrate is the most important variable here, and the thickness right now we have the substrate at 20 mils thickness with a dielectric value of 4.3. Now, as you might know, there are several parameters that will affect trace impedance. One of them is the thickness of the trace, the distance across here. Another is right here, the thickness of the substrate between the two layers. Another is the dielectric value. And all of these are also affected by the inductance of the trace, which is affected by thickness, and the capacitance. So right now we have the substrate set to 20, dielectric set to 4.3. And if we go up here and we double click the trace, and just so you know, I am set to select pin pairs right now. So if I right click and hit select pin pairs, I double click the trace, what comes up is an impedance of 72 ohms. Now 72 ohms is what I'm seeing at a trace width of 18.5. Let's say if I go ahead and I go back under Setup, Layer Definition, and I go under Thickness, and let's say I change the substrate, for example, to 10 mils, a 10 mil thickness, and now I double click this trace again. Now my impedance is 50 ohms, and this is helpful if we have a system where we have a source and termination impedance of 50 ohms, and then we make our transmission impedance, our trace impedance, 50 ohms. That's with a width of 18.5. Now, if I go over to my left here, where the trace widths are more narrow, I don't need 10 mil thickness, I see an impedance of 68 ohms. Or if I go to my right, and let's select this one instead, if we go to my right here and I look at a trace width that's thicker, 25 mils thick, my impedance went down to 42 here. Okay, if I go back to the middle where I have an impedance of 50 ohms, you can see just by modifying this trace width by just 1 mil, if I make this 17.5 mils and I apply it, you can see my impedance bumped up to 51 ohms. I hope this helps as a preliminary understanding of PCB track impedance measurement with Mentor Graphics PADS Professional Layout. Thank you.